Hello, today I'm going to talk to you through one more example before you take your quiz, and then I need to give you some advice or some direction for how to go about taking the quiz today. So today, on Thursday, November 5th, you are going to take a quiz, and today we're going to go over the agenda, which is to watch the video that's reviews and gives directions, and then the quiz is in 3 parts, and we'll go over that at the end. Make sure that you have watched this whole video before you go on to the quiz, because it will help you do well on the quiz. So first of all, let's look at some examples. Okay, so let's do the questable question: do birds visit blue or red feeders more often? Oh, should say yellow too. Blue, red, or yellow feeders more often. So we're going to identify our variables first. Okay, so our testable question, remember, a testable question needs something that you've changed and something that you can collect data on. And here we can collect data on the number of times the birds visit each color of feeder. Okay, so you're going to see that going throughout here. So remember that the independent variable is the one thing that you're changing. The dependent variable is the one thing that you are measuring. And the controlled variables are all the things that you keep the same. So I want you to take a second and look at that example and think, okay, what is my independent variable in that question? So what are you changing? What are you measuring? And then what could you control? Okay, so first of all, we're going to change the color of the bird feeder. Okay, so blue, red, yellow. Next, we're going to count the number of birds that visit each of the feeders. Pretty simple. So what are we going to control? There's a lot of things that we would have to keep the same in this experiment. Here are some examples. We'd use the same type of feeder, only change the color, put them at the same height, use the same amount of bird feed, use the same type of bird feed, make sure you're counting at the same time of the day, make sure at the same season of the year, the same type of feeder like we see there, and the same part of the yard. Oh, I got that one on there twice, type of feeder. So you can see some of the things that we would have to control. Now make sure when you're looking at your quiz that you don't include in your controls your independent variable, which in this case is the color of the bird feeder, and your dependent variable, which in this case is the number of birds that visit the feeder. One way to check and make sure you're doing it correctly is to look at all your choices and think, when you're getting to the controlled variable questions, which one is the independent variable and what is the dependent variable, and are they being included here? Then you can eliminate those right away, and we talked about that on Friday. Okay. So the next thing we're going to talk about then is, after we identify the variables, then we need to write a hypothesis. And first thing we'll do is write a null hypothesis, which means that they're not going to have any effect. Null means no, so no effect. So again, we need to know what our independent and our dependent variable is. So the null hypothesis is the independent, always has the same format. The independent variable has no effect on the dependent variable. So in this case, our null hypothesis would be the color of the bird feeder has no effect on the number of birds that visit each feeder. Okay, very simple. Now we have to identify our alternative hypotheses. And the alternative hypotheses, we need to know again how many different versions of the independent variable we have. And here we're going to test red, blue, and yellow. So we need 3 alternative hypotheses, and then we need to think about what are we going to talk about in the dependent variable. More or less visits is what we're talking about. So the alternative hypothesis, the H1 would be the red feeder will attract more birds, the H2 would be the blue feeder will attract more birds, and the H3 would be the yellow feeder will attract more birds. So writing the hypothesis, remember the null always has to include the words has no effect. So if we see both variables here, the null would state that the color of the bird feeder has no effect on the number of birds that visit. And then the alternative hypothesis would be that the H1 will attract more birds, the H2 will, the blue feeder will attract more birds, and then the H3, the yellow feeder, will attract more birds. And then the last thing we need to talk about is writing a good procedure. Remember that in writing a good procedure, the steps need to be short and easy to read. The steps need to be numbered. The steps need to start with an verb or an action word, and then the steps need to include details such as amount and measurements. And we have reviewed that a couple of times. So there's 2 things that you might be asked on the quiz. to identify which one of the following things is a step for writing a good procedure. And the other one would be to look at a procedure and think, okay, what's wrong with that is the steps aren't numbered or they don't start with an action word. Okay? And so the next part of the quiz, I want to just show you what it looks like, because when you're taking the quiz today, it's a little bit different because we wanted to divide it by target. And in order to do that, we needed Mastery Manager, unless we did it this way. So this way, if you don't pass one target, you only have to retake the one target instead of having to retake all of them. So we divided it out. So when you go to Google Classroom today, we already did one, and now you're finishing two. But here in step 3, you're going to take part 1 of the test. So you need to do all 3 steps, part 3, part 4, and part 5. Because if you noticed, it's part 1 of the test, part 2 of the test, and part 3 of the test. So the first part is on testable questions. So that you're going to click on that one. When you're done with that one, then you'll do part 2, which is on identifying variables. And then lastly, you're going to go to part 3, which is scientific procedures. Once you have taken all 3 quizzes, then you are done. And you need to take all 3. Okay, because otherwise you won't get a grade. And so this is like 3, we've covered all this, we've reviewed. So we taught it and we reviewed it Friday. We reviewed it yesterday. I did a short review again today. So make sure that you do all 3, because I think you guys are going to do really well because you really know your stuff. So make sure that you take all 3 parts of the test. So again, when you go to Google Classroom, we've already read through the agenda. You are watching the video currently about the directions and a review. Then you need to take part 1 of the test in step 3, part 2 of the test in step 4, and part 3 of the test in step 5. By doing this, it ensures that you only have to retake parts of the test instead of the whole thing. I hope that clears that up. So good luck on your test, you guys. I know you've got this.